Story 1. The Wrong Address. Max had been delivering pizzas for almost 2 years, and he thought he'd seen it all: creepy customers, wild parties, even someone answering the door naked. But nothing could have prepared him for that night. It started out like any other evening shift at Luigi's Pizza. The orders were coming in at a steady pace, and the streets were quieter than usual. Around 10:45 p.m., Max received an order for a single large pepperoni pizza. The address was in a part of town he wasn't familiar with, far from the usual neighborhoods. He punched the address into his GPS, but instead of giving him a direct route, it seemed confused, rerouting, recalculating over and over. Finally, after a few tries, it gave him a path through the back roads near the edge of a thickly wooded area. Max was used to shortcuts, but this one took him through dark, winding roads that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His headlights barely pierced the thick darkness, and the trees loomed over the road like ominous shadows. He drove deeper into the woods, the houses becoming sparser and older until there was only wilderness around him. His GPS announced that he had arrived, but all he could see was a dilapidated abandoned house at the end of a gravel driveway. Must be a mistake, Max thought. He double-checked the address on his phone, and it matched. Hesitant, but needing to finish the delivery, he grabbed the pizza and stepped out of his car. The silence around him was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of gravel under his shoes. As he approached the house, he noticed that the windows were boarded up, the door hanging loosely on its hinges. No lights, no sign of anyone living there. He knocked on the door lightly, expecting no answer. "Pizza delivery?" he called out, but his voice seemed to get swallowed by the night. Just as he was about to turn around, a deep voice from inside the house replied, "Come in!" Max froze. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but something compelled him to push the door open slightly. The interior was even worse than the exterior, dusty, cold, and filled with broken furniture. The smell of damp wood and decay hung heavy in the air. "Leave the pizza on the table," the voice said again, but it was deeper this time, more distorted. Max couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. Trembling, he placed the pizza box on the nearest table and hurried back to the door. As he was about to step outside, a cold hand grabbed his shoulder. Spinning around, he found himself face to face with a tall figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest, but the figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. Without wasting another second, Max ran to his car, slamming the door behind him and speeding down the road. When he checked his rearview mirror, the house was gone. Later that night, when he reported the strange incident to his manager, the address came up as non-existent. There had never been a house there. Story 2. The Midnight Caller. Sarah was new to pizza delivery, having started just a month ago to make some extra cash. She was young, confident, and had brushed off all the creepy stories her coworkers told her about late-night deliveries. After all, people loved to exaggerate. One Saturday night, just after midnight, Sarah got an order to deliver to an apartment building on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood was known for being rough, but she wasn't easily scared. As she approached the building, though, something felt off. The building was older, with several floors of grimy windows that reflected nothing but darkness. The front door was broken, hanging slightly ajar, as if no one had cared to fix it in years. She shrugged it off, probably just another rundown place. She'd seen worse. She headed inside, carrying a pizza for apartment 7B. The lobby was dimly lit by a single flickering light, and the air felt stale. As she made her way up the stairs, the sounds of creaking wood and distant footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. It felt like the walls were closing in on her. When she reached the 7th floor, the hallway stretched out like a narrow tunnel, with apartment doors tightly packed together. She found 7B easily, but there was no light coming from under the door. Hesitating for a moment, she knocked. Silence. She knocked again, louder this time. "Pizza delivery?" she called out, her voice sounding unusually loud in the stillness. From behind the door came the sound of faint shuffling, then a slow creak as the door opened slightly. But instead of a face or a greeting, all Sarah saw was a sliver of darkness through the gap. "You can leave the pizza on the floor," a whispery voice said from behind the door. Slide it inside. Her gut told her something wasn't right. She took a step back. You need to pay for it first, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. There was no response for a long moment. Just as Sarah was about to turn and leave, a hand slid through the gap. It was pale and thin, almost skeletal, with long fingers that curled unnaturally. In its grasp was a crumpled $20 bill. Sarah, frozen in place, took the money quickly and dropped the pizza box in front of the door. The hand retreated inside, and the door slowly creaked shut. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, her heart racing when she heard a quiet sound behind her. Footsteps. Not just footsteps, bare feet slapping against the cold tile floor, fast and uneven. They were coming closer. Panicking, she broke into a run, not daring to look back, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be chasing her. She reached the lobby and burst through the front door, gasping for air. Glancing back, she saw no one, nothing at all, but she swore she could still hear the footsteps, faint but relentless. Sarah quit her job the next day. Story 3. The Man in the Back Seat. Carlos had always been skeptical of the so-called haunted stories his friends told him about late-night deliveries, chalking them up to overactive imaginations or boredom. He prided himself on being level-headed, but one night changed his perspective forever. It was around 11:30 p.m. when he received an order to deliver 2 pizzas to a house at the edge of a small rural town. The location was isolated, surrounded by fields with only a few scattered houses along the way. He'd been there once before and didn't think much of it, aside from the long drive. As he drove through the desolate roads, his mind started to wander. The night was unusually quiet, with not a single car passing by in either direction. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other checking the rearview mirror occasionally, more out of habit than anything else. About 10 minutes into the drive, he glanced at the mirror again. This time, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a man sitting in the back seat. Carlos slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. He whipped around, expecting to see the intruder up close, but the back seat was empty. The pizzas had slid off the seat from the sudden stop, but there was no one there. Shaking, he took a deep breath and convinced himself that it had been a trick of the light, maybe his eyes playing games with him in the dark. He needed to finish the delivery and get back to the safety of the pizza shop. He continued driving, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw nothing, but there was a persistent sensation, like cold air brushing the back of his neck. Finally, he arrived at the house. The lights were on, and a man opened the door, greeting Carlos with a warm smile. Carlos handed him the pizzas, but before he could leave, the man asked, "Hey, did you pick someone up along the way?" Carlos blinked, confused. "No, why?" The man frowned. "Because when you pulled up, I saw someone sitting in your back seat." Carlos didn't respond. He turned and practically sprinted to his car, glancing at the back seat one last time. It was empty, but the chill lingered all the way back to town. He never drove that route again.